Problem number 1. Use the greatest common factor and the distributive property to rewrite 25 plus 55. Okay? To write in distributive property, we have to find the greatest common factor first. Let's use the ladder method to find the greatest common factor of 25 and 55. 25 and 55 have what factor in common? 5. 5 will go into 25 5 times, and 5 can go into 55 11 times. 5 and 11 do not have a common factor, so our ladder is complete, and our greatest common factor would be 5. Now remember, when writing in distributive property, the greatest common factor goes on the outside of the parentheses, and we multiply it by the sum of our non-common numbers. So that would be 5 times 5 plus 11. Don't forget to check your answer by distributing your 5. 5 times 5 equals 25. 5 times 11 equals 55, giving us 25 plus 55, which is the addition problem that we began with. This concludes problem number 1. Let's move on to number 2. Problem number 2. Miko wants to go camping. Her father said that if they could buy a tent and a stove for less than $140, they could go. They bought a tent, then they paid $53.99 for a stove. They still had $15.50 left of the $140. How much did the tent cost? Now this problem requires you to do more than one step. We know that they have $140 to spend. We also know that they spent $53.99 on the stove. We also know that once they finished spending money on both the stove and the tent, they were left with $15.50. Now, we have to figure out how much they paid for the tent. How much money was spent on the tent? Okay, so this requires more than one step. The first thing we want to do is figure out how much of the $140 can we account for. Well, we know that they spent $53.99 on the stove, and we know that $15.50 is left over. So how can we figure out how much of the $140 we know of? Add by lining up the decimals, $53.99 plus $15.50. Anytime we add decimals, we want to make sure that our decimals are lined up. 9 plus 0 is 9. 9 plus 5 is 14. We're going to carry the 1. 5 plus 3 is 8. Plus 1 more is 9. And 5 plus 1 is 6. So of the $140, we know that $69.49 is accounted for. So how do we figure out what's remaining of the $140 so that we know the cost of our tent? We can subtract. And when we subtract decimals, we line up the decimals. We're subtracting $140 minus the $69.49. $140 does not have a decimal in sight, so I'm going to place the decimal on the right. Make sure I line up my decimals. Now we can subtract. I can't take 9 from 0, but I can only borrow from the 4. 4 becomes a 3. This 0 becomes a 10 first. Then it shares 1, it becomes a 9. To make this 0 a 10. Then this 10 shares 1 to become a 9, making this 0 a 10. Now we're ready to subtract. 10 minus 9 is 1. 9 minus 4 is 5. Put my decimal in place. 9 minus 9 would be 0. I cannot take 6 from 3, so I'm going to borrow from the next door neighbor, which is 1. Making 1 0, making 3 13. 13 minus 6 would be 7. So the cost of the tent must be $70.51. Now, how could we check our answer if we wanted to? We could add $70.51, the cost of the tent, plus $53.99, the cost of the stove, plus $15.50, which is what was left over. And it should equal what? If our answer is correct, it should equal $140 total. So the total cost of the tent, which will answer our question, is $70.51. This completes problem number 2. Let's move on to question number 3. Problem number 3. George has $6 to spend on candy. If each candy bar costs 60 cents, how many bars can he buy? First thing we need to know is what type of problem this is. This would be a division problem. He's starting with a total of $6, making 6 his dividend. And he wants to see how many 60 cents are in $6. So how many groups of 60 cents are in $6, which will tell us how many candy bars he can buy. So 60 cents is our divisor. Now we know when we divide decimals, the divisor cannot be a decimal. So we have to move our decimal how many places to the right in the divisor? 2. 1, 2. And whatever we do to the divisor, we must do to the dividend. So since I moved my decimal 2 places in my divisor, I'm going to move it 2 places in my dividend. Okay? Now I'm going to rewrite my problem to make it 60. Now my divisor is a whole number, as it should be, going into 600. Now we're ready to divide. I'm going to bring my decimal straight to the top. 60 will go into 60 one time. 1 times 60 is 60. 60 minus 60 is 0. We'll bring down the 0. 60 will go into 0 times. 0 times 60 is 0, leaving us with 0. So, to answer your question, George would be able to buy 10 candy bars. This concludes your homework review. Make sure that you have made any corrections to your homework, as well as written your complete sentences for each question.